Jean-Paul, this year more than ever, we have found more people wanting to talk about the customer within the shared services industry. Why do you think that is?
Well, yeah, actually the fact that is that shared service is very often confused with simple centralization, and that's what makes the difference between the two is the customer. The fact that a shared service center is customer-centric, or should be, and therefore sensitive to what the customer wants. And the customer in the case of shared service centers is the business unit, and in the case of a BPO, that's the organization that is a client of the BPO organization. And in both cases, they spell out what they want, which tend to be fairly different from what the shared service center itself would think is important, relevant, or can be done. And that's this twist, if you want, of perception, or this gap of perception between the customer side and the provider side that creates the tension. And in the past, in different economic times, it was relatively easy for the SSC to disregard a lot of that, but now the customer is the paying customer, the one who funds everything, the ones for which all of that is done, and therefore you cannot ignore what they want anymore. And they want more customer intimacy, more flexibility, more innovation, and those things are difficult to provide for an SSC, and therefore that's where the tension comes from.
In your opinion, which is the biggest growth market for shared services and BPO?
Yeah, well, it really depends on the starting point. There are two cases roughly. The first case is those companies that have relatively little or nothing done in SSC already. For them, it's a challenge of actually putting it in place in the first place in a stable and sustainable way. So that it meets the strategic agenda of the company. So the growth would be then for those companies that have done nothing to actually start putting together shared service centers. And there's an awful lot of that in Asia, because until recently, Asian economies for the most part were focusing on a different set of problems, such as how to cope with double-digit growth, which are good problems to have. But now that the economic growth in the world is slowing down, then Asian economies are facing the same kind of issues as Western economies have been facing in the last 10 or 20 years. And therefore it's a challenge of actually doing more with less, more nimble, etc. So the growth for that set of the market will be to actually put in place shared service center in the first place. The second set is those who have it already, because it has been an initiative launched elsewhere in North America or in Europe or wherever, and for them the challenge and then for the growth is to go up the food chain of services. Having already provided in a competent way the basics of accounting, of HR, payroll, of basic procurement, is going up the food chain and starting to create shareholder value or contribute to the creation of shareholder value. And that also is happening in Asia very rapidly, because Asia is the place where much of the growth is coming from for many companies.
Which technology do you think is having the biggest impact within the shared services industry?
Well, I think that I'm a big believer in cloud technology in various shapes and ways, because in many Asian countries the infrastructure, the technology is not necessarily in place for very heavy, cumbersome, full ERP, wall-to-wall, single instant SAP, that sort of thing. And therefore a more nimble access to technology is required. And with many of these cloud solutions, all you need is internet access and a web browser and possibly a VPN, and there you go. And that is in fact a big enabler for technology for shared services in Asia Pacific.
How would you compare shared services and outsourcing markets in Asia with those of other regions? Do you see any difference or similarities?
Well, there is one major difference, is that shared services in general and BPO that came on its back was very largely based on labor arbitrage. From highly expensive places such as Western Europe or North America to more affordable locations. And in many cases in Asia, it has been perceived at the very least as not being the case, where labor used to be plentiful and relatively affordable across the board. It was not necessarily always true, but that's certainly the way it was perceived to be. And now this is changing very quickly. Now you have, once again, two situations. You have the situation of the high-cost area, such as Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, Japan, and then you have where the same equation of labor arbitrage happens to make sense. And then you have other places where labor is supposedly cheaper, but in fact it is not entirely true, because although the average wage in many countries is very low, the wage of the people you would employ in shared service or in support functions has to be much higher than the average wage of the average blue-collar worker. And second, there is a problem of availability of talent in many places, like in Jakarta, in Ho Chi Minh City, or in Bangkok. The real issue is not the cost of labor, it's the scarcity of talent. And therefore shared service centers have a big part to play, not so much on the cost side of the equation, but rather more the availability of talent side of the equation.
What stands out to you as the most innovative business transformation project that you have taken part in within the last 5 years?
Well, without quoting any name, of course, but I would say that maybe an innovative way of dealing with this issue of Asia being different. The fact that in many places in Asia, companies feel that they do not have the critical mass to justify an SSC operation. And in fact, I've been privileged in helping quite a few companies see that there is a way to actually mitigate all of that. Yes, it's true that your 3 or 4 full-time equivalent in Vietnam just do not justify an SSC operation, and it is going to be expensive and difficult to support your Vietnam operation, to take that example, out of the Philippines or out of India. But there are ways around that that are based on clever technology, a redesign of the organization, a revamping of the retained organization locally, etc. And there are ways to go around the issues and in fact to deliver value even in those relatively challenging situations. It's not always that easy, but there are ways around it, and that's where I'm proud of being able to help.